I'm Jenny Shanker. For those of you who I have not met, I'm excited because I have many friends on this call who have been with us in the Guided Pathways work for years now. So it's really exciting to see you and to kind of kick off this institute, which has been a long time in coming, since March, in fact. But hopefully you have all been keeping well and you're excited to share the lessons that you have learned and hear from our national partners about what they have learned. I see Rob and Gretchen are in the same shot. That's great. Hopefully we'll all have a good time this morning. So thank you for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and we are recording this morning the plenary session. We will not be recording the breakout sessions, but we will be recording the plenary session and we will be posting that once we get that video rendered. So I'm going to go ahead and start to share my screen. And this is our we are debuting a new slide template from the MCSS. So please note fun enhancements to our visual appearance. I am joined by my excellent colleagues from the Center for Student Success, Precious Miller, who is many of you may have met as she is heading up our My Best work, Erica Oriens, who you know, and Katie Giardello. Happy to have them here. We have discovered that the larger the team that we can have on a Zoom meeting, the better, because then there's always somebody to take over when something bad happens. We do have some fascinating and wonderful facilitators. We have Rob Johnstone, who has been with us on this journey from the beginning. We are happy to be joined by Gretchen Schmidt, who kicked us off and then left us to steer ourselves for a while and is now back with us again. I'm happy to see you, Gretchen. And Hannah Lahr from CCRC, who has been shepherding us along from a data perspective. And then our critical friend evaluator, Dawn Coleman, is with us today as well. And so we have a great group of people to spend the morning with. We also are joined by a number of our Guided Pathways mentors who will be helping in the breakout sessions. You see them listed here. These are people who have been participating in a program that we kicked off last March. Not last month, long time. Yeah, well, March 2019. Yes, February or March 2019. And we, these are people who are willing to share their expertise. We're building them into our programs as much as we can to help increase our capacity to support each other. This is a peer mentoring network, so you will see these people in your breakout sessions. The first thing that I want to ask you all to do is to rename yourself to include your college if you have not already. And this is going to be, we're going to have a big renaming game in this meeting. There's going to be several times when you'll need to rename yourself. So you want to practice now by going to the participant list from your system tray, clicking on that, finding yourself, clicking on that More button, and then choosing rename, and then you can type your name, your institution, your company in there, and that will also help if people who do not know each other will be able to see where you are from. So I'll give you a minute to do that. I see some people are. Great, great, great. And while you're working on that, I want to remind you of some different ways that we have set up for you to engage today. We have the chat box, which hopefully you have all found. Feel free to drop a good morning message in there. We're going to be having some fun with that. in a little while, but meanwhile, just feel free to say good morning in the chat if you would like to do so. You also can raise your hand to speak. We are able to monitor that hand raising. And so we will be able to see if you have raised your hand, and you can unmute yourself. This is a big group, so while we hope to be able to have some interactive discussion, we will probably ask you to raise your hand before you go ahead and unmute yourself. So it's good to raise your hand there. You can also indicate in the chat that you have something to say. Looks like people are finding the chat box. Great. So just a little bit of an update on us. You may have been wondering what we've been doing since you saw us last. But we have been busy with all of these initiatives that are listed here. And I want to just highlight a couple of them this morning while we have a few minutes of our time. You see the logo for the Guided Pathways Institute. We've been excited about running these over the past 3 years. This one and the meeting in July will be the final meetings that will be branded as Guided Pathways Institutes. But I think you'll see as we go through the meeting how the other initiatives fold in. One that you may not be as familiar with is the MI Start to Finish. That's our new initiative that we are just kicking off now, that is focused on scaling DevEd reform. So really building up our capacity to move in the direction of COREC, which a lot of our colleges have done already in English. Hoping to build that capacity for our colleges to deliver some COREC math and also kind of move those courses online as needed in the pandemic. Monitor data using the voluntary framework of accountability. And we will be focusing on inclusive teaching and equity in My Start to Finish, as well as placement reform. So stay tuned for more information about that. And then when you come to the meeting in July, I have asked Precious to give an overview of what's going on with building economic stability today, the My Best initiative. But today I want to first of all pause and see if there's any of these initiatives that you have any questions about. And my team members, I can't see the chat, so if somebody has a question, please alert me via text.
No questions right now, Jenny.
Cool, thank you. All right, I also wanted to call your attention to our upcoming events and the events page, which is on our Michigan Community College Association, mcca.org website. And you can see that you can if you were to scroll down, you would see our meeting on in July, which I'll show you again at the end. But on this events page, you can register for everything that we are doing. So if you are wondering where to find the registration link, start at mcca.org/events. And the initiative that I want to highlight today is our Twitter engagement, our Birds of a Feather Twitter engagement. So we're looking to connect with Birds of a Feather, including equity-minded staff and faculty. And I'm going to let Katie talk just a little bit about what we are doing on Twitter.
All right, hello. And if you hear the chipmunks in the background, my children are watching Alvin and the Chipmunks for the second day in a row, which is really interesting in the background on a large conference call. But we've all been tweeting through the Center for Student Success. This is something we've had a profile for a while, but not something that we've really curated as much as we have more recently. Many of you know that one of our signature tasks at MCSS is to have big meetings and give you free food, but we can't do that in the time of social distancing. So we have been strategizing ways to get in touch with people in different spaces. And I had the opportunity during my graduate program to read a book about emerging leadership, participatory leadership, and using social media to kind of empower networks of people to connect in digital spaces and make a difference in that way. So we are trying this out. We keep saying it's a grand experiment. It only works if you come along with us. So we would love it if you could meet us on Twitter. Even right now, I will actually be tweeting through the meeting today. So if you say something really insightful, perhaps it will be tweeted. And if you hear something insightful and you're on Twitter and you would like to tweet it, we would love that. We are using, as I can't remember, Jenny, if you said we're using that signature hashtag, but that My Student Success is our signature hashtag. And then for today, we can be using, we have a guided pathways hashtag too, I believe, that doesn't look like it's on this
On that slide, no.
slide.
Yeah, it's MI Guided Pathways.
Which I just typed into the chat. So if you decide to tweet with us today, we would love to have both of those hashtags on your tweet if you have enough characters left. That will help us aggregate today's conversation. And I'm going to be tweeting a few things, like I said, so if it's easier for you to just interact with my tweets rather than making your own tweets, that's fine too. But we would love it if you could like them, share them, which is you do that with a retweet button, or comment if we say something and you want to make a comment on that as well. So that's what we're looking for. Jenny, feel free to fill in what I didn't mention, but I would look forward to seeing you all on Twitter this morning.
Yeah, and if you want to find out more about this initiative, you can find it on the MCCA page under the Center for Student Success, under Initiatives and Resources. So you can see some information. First of all, we have a super cool little video that takes about less than 2 minutes. It's like 30 seconds long. That is invites you to our Twitter campaign. And also Katie has made this lovely instructional video. If you have not used Twitter, or if you haven't used Twitter in a while, Katie will lead you step by step through interacting with us on Twitter. And we are excited to kind of stretch ourselves in this direction. So please feel free to ask any questions, particularly reach out to Katie. She's our Twitter in chief. We also are having, I want to mention, please join us actually on June 30th, because we are focusing on pathways to my student success in a Twitter chat at noon on June 30th. And you will hear more about that through the kind of follow-up emails to this meeting and other meetings and other communications that you get from us. But we're going to be featuring guided pathways, math pathways, and transfer pathways on June 30th. And we hope that you will plan to drop in with us for our Birds of a Feather Twitter chats. And then you see, we're gonna be doing this as kind of a Twitter Tuesday thing. So we're gonna be doing 3 of these over the summer. So now I really want to introduce Rob Johnstone and Gretchen Smith to catch us up on what's going on with them. And they're going to be our plenary speakers for today. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to let Rob and Gretchen say hi and load up their slides. And welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Hello, everybody. We are trying to share the screen here. Good afternoon. Gretchen and I are here and happy to be chatting with you all today. It's great to have so many of you on the call today. I think I have to do it this way today. All right, how's that look?
Got it.
Okay. So we are coming to you.
Hi, everyone.
We are here in Massachusetts at a kind of a place we got for a month when we canceled all of our summer vacations, and we kind of are sheltering in place away from home in Connecticut. So we are here in Chatham in Cape Cod, and we have kids and kids' friends running around, a 6-month-old puppy, a 15-year-old daughter, and various other chaos. Gretchen's coming, leaving AACC and doing work with NCII starting June 30th. So we got all new computers. I got a new laptop about a month ago, and the motherboard died over the weekend. So just good times, right? We're on the road, the motherboard died. So I will be, we're on Gretchen's computer. I'll be doing the iPad later for the breakout sessions, but we're happy to be with you. We have such good friends in Michigan. I see the names and faces. It's been a long journey. And we're happy to be here with you today. These are troubled times, and we're trying to do this hard work that we're doing for equity and social justice and systemic change through Pathways. And we'll talk a little bit about the connection to the Equity Through Pathways guides that we've developed during the conversation today. But we're happy to share some work we actually released last fall. And I think there's no better audience for this than Michigan. You know, when we come back and look at the states around the country that kind of picked up the ball with guided pathways and ran with it, you could put Michigan at the front of that list, along with Arkansas and Texas and Ohio. Gretchen, of course, back when she was at Jobs for the Future, before she came to AACC, working with the Student Success Centers. And those were really the 3 or 4 that early on picked us up and ran with it. So we've seen so many of you through the years. It's great to check in with you now. And I think the topics that we're going to talk about today are really relevant to you, the fact that most of you are on this journey, having made a variety of levels of progress. And what we're trying to do with these resources we're going to talk about today is really help you kind of reflect and check in on that progress. And we're going to share with you some thoughts along the way. We can't monitor chat, so we're going to rely on our Michigan friends, Erica, Jenny, Katie. There's no cadence to this. We fire in when you need to. They'll stop us. Gretchen will be firing in as well here as we move through this. So with that, we'll just kind of get rolling. We're excited to be with you here today. We're going to talk about a couple of documents and then some kind of a lens of the student experience. And the first thing we always do, not just because the wife and husband team here involves someone who was at one of the partners, AACC, and I'm at NCII, but we get to work with a great group of national partners. You know these national partners very well. AACC and the AACC Pathways work, Kay McClenny, Gretchen Schmidt, Sarah Kale, CCRC, Hannah Lars on the call, and Davis Jenkins, great friends to Michigan. Our friends at CESI, Evelyn Waiwaiale, who's moved on, and Linda Garcia, Aspen as well, a great group of people that we get to be partners with. And we kind of share our thought capital and slides. And I always have this slide at the start because none of this is NCII work. It's NCII and friends work, or friends and NCII work, depending on the order. So we're excited to continue our partnership with these folks. And it's great to have Hannah on the call. And Hannah can always fire in any keynote we're doing because she has such amazing insight. I'm not sure anyone knows more about what's going on the ground than Hannah and her colleagues around the country. And so this is part of we're going to share kind of a little bit on this guided pathways resources. Many of you helped us with a lot of the questions in the early days of the guided pathways movement when completion by design was kind of entering its later stages. We got a lot of questions about guided pathways, and I fairly early on had started a blog post, a blog series for completion by design that I think no one read. The web page suggests no one read it. But we were kind of walking through the big questions that people asked about pathways. And then somewhere around 2015, we turned that into a paper called Guided Pathways Demystified that looked through the top 10 questions people were asking about pathways, really from a theoretical standpoint, like, isn't free choice the cornerstone of American higher education? Or how can students make career decisions at age 18 or 19? And some great questions, right? All very ground level practitioner questions. And we explored them in about a page each. So if you're kind of new to the Pathways movement or you still have some of those questions, you'll find them in Guided Pathways Demystified 1, the more theoretical questions. And then when we started presenting and talking about Guided Pathways Demystified 1, a bunch of people said, hey, what about this question? What about this question? Which was interesting is around 2015 or 16, partially because of Gretchen and her colleagues, at least I would say a large partially, because of Gretchen and her colleagues at AACC and Hannah on the call at CCRC, as the Guided Pathways movement picked up steam, states like you in Michigan, we started getting less theoretical questions and more operational questions, like, how do we do this when students are 2 levels below in math and English? Or my other favorite one, shouldn't we just wait this out like every other educational fad of the last 25 years? Like really kind of good ground level questions. What do we do when a student falls off the path? Those were explored in Guided Pathways Demystified 2. So again, if you want to, you can kind of take a look at any of the questions. There's PowerPoint guides, discussion guides on there. Also around that time, we had released a return on investment model. So one of the early kind of thoughts about guided pathways is this is great, but it costs a lot. We need more advisors. We need more advising. I mean, I think most of you know the Jackson story in Michigan about how to pay for some of this. But one of the things that early on, I had done some work on both in industry and higher education was on return on investment modeling. The idea that yes, something may cost more if you look at it just as a cost. But the question you might be asking is not just what something costs, but what do you get in terms of a benefit economically? Look, we're all in this for the moral and ethical reasons of trying to improve outcomes, to fight poverty, to fight racism, to reduce equity gaps. But institutions also have to run themselves. What I like to say about the RI modeling is it's one of the very few cases where your moral and ethical desire to make things better for students systemically may very well align with your financial incentive. Because when you keep students longer and more of them complete, you actually get more revenue from those students, even without performance funding models. You get more revenue from tuition, you get more revenue from apportionment. And so if you're kind of a business type or you're just interested in this, that third document explores, like let's just say we spend $200,000 on 4 new advisors or 3 new advisors. All right, that's interesting. The question is, does that actually produce an effect in students being retained longer? And if they are retained, we can estimate and monetize what that retention might look like. Georgia State very famously said that for every 1 point they move fall to fall retention, they received $3 million additional dollars in tuition. 1 point retention. 4-year school, right? They have a better, probably for us, it wouldn't be 1 million, but you can actually calculate what it actually would cost, what revenue you would get back by increases in retention and really an overall unit taking. So if you're interested, that's in guide number 3. And then these last 2, guides 4 and 5, which we'll be talking about today and next time, we're really in response to kind of reflecting on the movement. These were just released last fall, which seems like 9 years ago, like the events that have occurred since September 2019 and now, in 9 months really feels like 9 years. But I'll kind of walk through the setup of guides 4 and 5 now. So by the way, those are all available on the website. They're downloadable. Use them. Fire questions to us. We are happy to explore them with you. How did we get here? So this is, I lost count of my colleges somewhat recently, at having worked with over 400 colleges in the last decade. And that's anywhere from a day to very long 2-year engagements or 3-year engagements. And we've seen hundreds of colleges on this journey to guided pathways. I don't know if HANA and CCRC have updated these numbers. We think there's 200 or 250 colleges engaged in guided pathways work on projects like Michigan Guided Pathways or California Guided Pathways or ACC Pathways. And maybe 100 of them, 125 have kind of gone deeper and really kind of rolling towards a set of colleges that started rolling out what you might consider version 1.0 of guided pathways. And we talk a lot about the versions of pathways because unlike things we did before this, pathways aren't a project. They're not an initiative. As Ed Bowling, our friend from North Carolina, says, who's a friend of Michigan, it's something you're becoming, not something you're doing, right? And so this is a journey, right? And we think about this in terms of what's the version of the guided pathways journey your new students in fall 2020 will experience. Maybe you haven't rolled it out yet. You probably have rolled out some features of guided pathways, but we're always trying to help colleges think about what features are in the next version. What have we learned from this version? 3 years ago, there were, if you go back to 2017, there were probably 10 to 15 colleges in the country who had rolled out version 1.0 of Pathways, primarily the completion by design colleges. Gretchen's colleges from the ACC Pathways project was fall 18. Rolled 30 colleges, including Jackson and Lansing and Mission, rolled out version 1.0 in fall of 18, so that added 30 to the list. You had some colleges in Michigan, I'd say Arkansas, Texas. There's probably 75 to 100 now who've rolled out version 1.0 of Pathways. And so they all didn't look the same, right? Their versions of Pathways look differently. Some of them emphasize certain pieces of Pathways. It's a big pot of things you can work on. There is a lot of similarity in the journeys. One of the things we've recognized is, you're wrestling with the same fundamental decisions, how you approach that at a college. There's not one answer to Pathways. There's not, anyone who tells you there's one way to do guided pathways or it's reductive and you just do these 3 steps, that's not what this is about. These are a series of big ideas, a series of decisions you have to make about the student experience, and there are different ways to go about those decisions. We usually, the more systemic, the more scaled, the more authentic and intentional your efforts are, the deeper the work is going to be. But there are different stages of this journey. And so colleges are at different stages of this journey. And again, the goal of all of this should have always been and should continue to be to optimize the student experience. And then colleges have to actually consider, so we talk a lot about the student experience. What would it actually look like to change the student experience? We're going to talk more about metrics next time. And we're going to tell you about the guide this time, Guided Pathways Resource Series, document number 5. We'll explore it next time. But also, let CCRC, our great friends at CCRC, Hannah and Davis, who've done such amazing work over the years. I mean, Hannah wasn't around at this time, but in the early days of completion by design, we had 32 key performance indicators we were requiring all the colleges to collect because we didn't, the foundation involved really wanted to see kind of what stuck, right? And they were very measurement driven. And over time and a lot of research from CCRC and some others, primarily CCRC, we landed on this set of what we call the momentum metrics, which are these things like, you know, the percentage of students who achieve certain transferable unit thresholds in the first year, 15, 24, 30 units. Other big ones, the percent of students that pass transfer level math and English in the first year. Kind of fall to spring retention, course success rate in the first semester. So it's a simple set of 5 to 7 metrics. And Hannah can tell you more about it next time, but they are highly predictive of downstream completion. And those metrics are awesome. They are incredibly predictive, more so. I mean, for your math dorks in the room, you don't get R-squareds above 0.5 very often. To have predictive value reaching 0.8 over 3 states data, where 80% of the variance in completion is described by a set of predictor variables, a small set of predictor variables, is pretty incredible. So more on that next time. The one observation CCRC and we would all share with you is even though those are great metrics, they are still summative of the student experience. They're not actually designed specifically to address the student experience itself. And we might need some metrics to consider whether that's actually changed. And so we kind of worked on that last fall as well. So I mentioned this a minute ago. We've got lots of colleges who are exploring guided pathways. We would say that group, 500, 750 community colleges, many, if not most community colleges are kind of exploring pathways. Sometimes reductively, sometimes deeply. I mean, everyone takes their own kind of path with this. And this group I was talking about that maybe is 150 or 200, Hannah can fire into the chat what she thinks the number is now, who really are kind of engaged in what we would call guided pathways design activity. Like we're doing something. We're not just going to talk about pathways. We're not exploring it. By the way, as CCRC will tell you, to get the foundation to do the work can sometimes take 2 to 3 years to be ready to get on with the kind of planning and design work of implementing version 1.0 of pathways. And then there are a smaller set of colleges who rolled out version 1.0 of pathways. We're guessing in the 50 to 100 range. We know a lot of those colleges. We've worked with a lot of those colleges, NCII and CCRC and AACC. But one of the things we came to recognize fairly recently, and this is what we're going to explore for a second, is that there's been a lot of, one of the things that happened early on is there was a lot of theoretical talk about pathways, which was great and necessary. And then as the field shifted in 2015, 16, 17, you started getting a lot more colleges talking about design and actually working on guided pathways. I remember where this happened. We were sitting at AACC, the last in-person AACC, which I think was in Texas, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah, I was in Dallas. And we were sitting possibly with an adult beverage late at night outside somewhere, talking. We're kind of reflecting on the colleges we'd worked with. And where they were in the process. And one of the things that we were talking about is the relationship between the colleges working on pathways and then things actually changing in the student experience. And started thinking about this, how would we know that things are changing in the student experience? And I'll give you an example. And this is now a composite example from a number of colleges. We have a very happy bulldog who has entered into the picture here. So just back from a break. So the thundering you're hearing in the background is actually canine, not human, so that's good. So we started reflecting on these kind of journeys that colleges were on. And some colleges have rolled out pathways, and this started at one college where I worked with colleges more deeply in a cohort model called A2I2, where we work with colleges over 2 years, and colleges at all stages of the pathways journey, from just starting to the ones who've been at it for 6, 7 years, getting some kind of professional support and strategic consulting, technical assistance. One of our colleges I had worked with happened to be an AACC Pathways college, and a very good college, by the way, an award-winning college. And I was talking with their provost, and I was talking to her and asking her, all right, so this was in spring of 19. So in fall of 18, they had rolled out version 1.0 of Pathways. And so I asked her, so all right, well, you rolled out your maps. So you did all that great work mapping. You got your default maps. I asked her a question of, all right, so what percentage of your students who started last fall now have customized full program education plans based on those maps, right? So the maps were always just a point of departure, a starting point, the default kind of model of which we could then create customized ed plans for all students. And over time, I've asked this question in a number of places, but what do you think the most common answer to that question is when you ask what percentage of your students who came in last fall have a customized education plan, full program education plan? I'm going to look at chat real quick. Fire in chat if you think you have an answer to that, what that question might look like. Actually, I can't see chat, so that's interesting because I'm in full mode. To save a little time, the most common answer to that question is, of course, I don't know. I don't know what percentage of our students have customized full program. Some colleges do, but very commonly we don't know. And when I pressed a little at some college, I asked, because I knew these people, they were colleagues and friends of mine, like, all right, what would you guess would be the percentage of students who have customized full program ed plans? Some of them say things like, I don't know, 15, 20%, which does beg the question, why did we go through all this effort with the maps when we don't have a process to convert those maps into customized ed plans for every student? I mean, this is a version of like the osmosis theory that we think that's just going to happen naturally. Well, no, we've learned we need to do things structurally and systemically to make those things happen. By the way, that college had rolled out version 1.0. They already knew they needed to work on it, and maybe this helped them with some impetus to work a little farther. And they, by the way, since then have worked on it. Meta majors at another college. This is an even more favorite example of this problem. All right, so you've designed your meta majors. You went through this 5-step process, which almost every college goes to. For 2 to 3 months, you argue about what you are going to call your meta majors. And you use the same 8 words: areas of interest, career and academic programs, schools, fields of interest, some mad lib of those 8 or 9 words, right? So after that, you finally decide, okay, it's fields of interest. Now, for 2 or 3 months, you're going to argue about how many of them you're going to have and what their names are going to be. You're going to have a program that doesn't fit anywhere, asking if they can get their own meta major, right? By the way, no should be the answer to that. You're going to go through that process with meta majors, right? So then you're going to say, we've got 7 of them and their names A, B, C, D, E, and F, right? Cool, got that. Now you get to sort the programs into the meta majors. That's going to take 2 or 3 months, right? And somewhere in there, you get the 4th step, which is some program goes, has figured out, wait a minute, students are learning about my program through this meta major process. Can I be in 3 meta majors, right? That always happens. Usually our suggestion would be no to that as well, although everyone finds their own path with this. And then you get done with that, and finally you've got the list, you've got the names, you've got the mapping done, and you say, we got meta majors. All right. I would point out at this point, absolutely nothing has changed for your students yet. Not a single thing has changed for your students yet. And when I came and asked the question at some colleges, and Gretchen and others would ask, so you rolled out your meta majors last fall. Cool. How is the student experience different for a student who started at your college this last fall when you had meta majors versus last fall when you didn't? Now, some colleges had very good answers to that. Monroe did some great work on this.
St. Pete has the best structure.
So that's St. Petersburg College in Florida
has a culture built around, and Sinclair does too. There's probably 15 or 20 colleges that have a culture built around their meta majors. St. Petersburg has evolved their meta majors, which are called career and academic communities. And they've developed tri-teams in their career and academic communities where they have a faculty lead, an advising lead, and a student life lead in their meta majors that now work together. They have changed their entire department structure. They've changed their program approval structure. They have changed all of the former existing structures within their organization now to revolve around these tri-teams. And they meet regularly and plan regularly, like that team teaching in middle school often happens. And that they have developed a culture where these meta majors have superseded the department level structures. And it actively includes applied learning experiences. It includes all of the student life clubs and the student life information that students need. The transfer information, the direct to employment information, the career exploration is all customized in these career and academic communities. that it is a structure that we use as a model, and as we think about how to evolve meta majors into something beyond just a choice architecture, which is really what it started as, to something that develops a holistic support structure around students in their program and career areas.
Yeah, thanks to Gretchen. And Gretchen's also done great work. We work with all 10 Maricopa colleges in the Phoenix area. Kay McClenny, Gretchen Smith and I, they're part of the cohort model we run as well. We're in our third year of working with them. They're rolling out their version 1.0 this fall, and have done some amazing work. Scottsdale, Estrella, Mountain, Chandler, it doesn't matter. The other one, a bunch of those colleges have done some amazing work. And so I think the point that Gretchen makes is really good. So early on in the Pathways movement, we would always talk about mapping and meta majors. And then we would also say, but the maps have to be turned into plans and the meta majors have to be turned into experience. But because things are reductive, I think a lot of energy went into mapping and meta majors, right? Rather than the next step, which was how do we create experiences out of those two things? And as Gretchen says, learning communities. Kay McClenny is very strong on the idea that these meta majors give you the structure to create learning communities. When I think about this, I think that what a lot of colleges have done, not all of them, but a lot of colleges have done is amazing work building the vessel, if you will. We've built the ship and we've put it in the water. So the structure is there, the ship is there, it's in the water, but we haven't filled it with anything yet or pointed it in a given direction, which would be the experiential part of it. And so again, this is, these maps and meta majors are just illustrations, and colleges are at various stages on a continuum of how far they've gone with this. And again, it's not a mistake to not have gone farther with the experience. It's not that you're behind, it's that we learn from each successive version. All right, we did a great job with the structure. Now we need to make sure that structure is resulting in the student experience. And so this and other reflections suggested to us we needed to create a couple of short resources. You'll notice of the 5 GPRS guides, that the first 2 are about 15 to 20 pages and the last 2 are about 4 pages. Somewhere along the way we realized that people are really, really busy, and the percentage of people who are interested in something but will not read a 15 to 20 page paper is high. 3 pages, much more attainable. And so we're doing a lot of shorter documents now that have resources and links for further exploration. So you'll find both of these documents are in the 3 to 4 page range. They have PowerPoints associated. We're going to give you the one from today. We'll go through the one for the 5th document next time. But what we've decided to do, and kind of as we reflected on where the movement has gone and how to reclaim the student experience as the heart of the work, is to offer a list of kind of key decisions we see as vital to truly transforming the student experience at scale. That's Guided Pathways Resource Series Guide number 4. It's what we're going to talk about today. The 5th guide was then, all right, so what are the kind of research questions or what data might we gather to demonstrate the impact of your Guided Pathways design work on the student experience? Is that what we will explore next time? We'll also explore some of the metrics from our friends at CCRC. So that's where we're heading. And then let's talk about equity. I mean, it's impossible to not talk about equity these days. We would have talked, this slide was long before the last events of the last 3 weeks, where we are seeing even more evidence of the need to address systemic racism and actually direct racism and anti-poverty work as well. I spend a lot of time as a white male talking in front of rooms, and what I tell people is I think of the white privilege that I have as something to use for the good, to listen, to learn, but to also call conversations that may not be possible for our colleagues of color to call. I think about Maslow's need hierarchy a lot, right? And I think that if you think about it around issues of race and equity, I'm allowed to sit at like the 3rd level of Maslow's need hierarchy and talk about white privilege and privilege, when my brothers and sisters of color are often sitting at the basic levels. Remember Maslow's need hierarchy, the first one was safety. Well, that's kind of been attacked even pretty much in the last couple. We've learned a lot about that basic safety being attacked, which causes stress, according to Maslow. That means you have a hard time moving up the hierarchy. The 2nd level, by the way, is about kind of the economics to produce food and safety. Well, we've got some pretty strong evidence that the economics are systemically oppressing certain groups of people in our country, namely Black and brown people. There's absolutely white poverty as well. But when you look at the data, you see pretty strong evidence that there are systemic issues going on here. And so what I always say in front of rooms about this is, I am incredibly comfortable, and I want my colleagues who are white to be increasingly comfortable being uncomfortable talking about this, right? These issues of equity and race. I think it is our duty to kind of enter these conversations. We work in higher education. We have a chance to work on systemic reforms. We fundamentally believe that this work we're doing in guided pathways combined with equity work, there's guided pathways kind of alone work, there's equity work, but there's a huge Venn diagram in the middle of intersection where we take equity lenses into guided pathways ideas. And we won't talk about that as much today, but we do have a series of guides to open that up that we could explore in a future effort. But having said that, all of these questions we give you, these decisions we're making, these lenses into the student experience, you have to disaggregate the data. You have to think about, understand the student experience of historically underserved, of Black students, of Latinx students particularly, who are disproportionately first-time in college students because of some of those systemic issues we just mentioned. In one of the guides, Tia McNair, who's one of the leaders at AAC&U, a very strong African-American woman who brilliantly shares this guide, that we can't let the lived experience of white students be the benchmark against which other students' experiences are measured. We have to celebrate and value and validate the experiences of our students of color and understand how our systems either provide barriers to those experiences or provide bridges from those experiences into higher education. When you're thinking about the student experience, it's not one student experience, right? It's a lot of different student experiences, and looking at what the trends are, especially by race, especially by gender in certain programs, is going to be really important. I will say this though, having been an IR guy before and worked in data for 30 years now, although I'm only 44, I'm not actually 44. I'm closer to that than you'd think. But having worked with data for a long time, disaggregating data doesn't ensure anything, right? Disaggregating data is step one of a process in which you need to understand the data, bring your experiences and resources to bear to draw meaning from the data, and that producing systemic efforts to improve equitable outcomes is going to take the action steps part of it. So disaggregating data, incredibly important first step, but it doesn't get you all the way there. You have to, once you understand that not all students experience college the same way, we now need to kind of think about what do we do about that.
Yeah, and I think that the more that we individualize student experiences, whether it is around academic plans or contextualized intake processes, holistic advising, deliberate handoffs between professional advisors and faculty advisors, the more that the students feel an ethic of care around them, that's what's going to make the difference, right? We have to create the student experience in a more individualized way with a combination of changing the way that we do work, but also the business processes and the structures on the back end that reinforce it. So it will be a combination of how we do things technologically and how we do things in a human interaction, in finding the optimal way so that students feel cared for and also feel like they have a person to go to when a barrier is put in place or an experience is not maximized. And I think we're going to start, particularly in this virtual environment or some hybrid virtual environment that we're going into in the coming academic year, the student's sense of belonging at an institution is going to change, is going to be even more important than it was historically. That if we want students to continue to be engaged, to feel part of our institutions, to be successful in a changing environment, they have to feel like they belong there and that they can reach out to someone that when something happens that is beyond their control.
Absolutely. And so that kind of gets us to the starting line. Some additional points of reflection. These aren't meant to be exhaustive guides. I mean, one thing about the guide number 4, which we're about to share with you, is it can be pretty overwhelming. We actually identified 32 different decisions about the student experience. We'll talk about that organization by the last momentum framework in a second. It is not meant as this exhaustive checklist that you need to check off each box. Yes, did that, did that, did that. It's meant to be a series of kind of decisions about the student experience that over time you're going to successively explore. We've talked to some colleges, not to name them, but are in that inner circle of people who've been doing guided pathways the longest and maybe the deepest, and asked them when they looked at this list of 32 questions, if they were to rate themselves 1 to 5 on how deep they've gone, what number of these 32 questions would they say they were a 4 or a 5 on in terms of changing the student experience? And I'm not naming them because the answer at some of these colleges was somewhere around half. And these are at the colleges who've done the deepest work on guided pathways, which is why this is a journey. I mean, everyone always forgets about that Georgia State story. You know, someone comes and presents, Tim Rennick presents, or one of his colleagues presents. It's amazing. And he does this every time he presents. That's a 15-year journey, right? It started in 2002. You don't get from a 31% completion rate with 10-point equity gaps to almost a 60% completion rate with no equity gaps overnight. It takes time and successive time. And one great thing about Michigan that you guys have that most states don't is if you look at the Georgia State story, it falls into two buckets: guided pathways, before it was even called that, and student financial stability. And they do those things together, maybe better than any college in the country. There's some good community college examples of that, Skyline, LaGuardia, as well. But that story over 15 years is about both of those things and the intersection in the student experience. They're one of the colleges, Valencia as well, First National Prize winner, who maniacally focuses on that student experiences and managing it at scale. Again, these guys, one possible reaction to today is to be overwhelmed by this list of decisions. We don't usually, as of yet, I don't present this list of decisions to colleges who are just starting, because it can be almost too much, right? We kind of, so that's just kind of one thing to think about. By the way, for number 5, previewing next time, there are quantitative and qualitative measures. The qualitative measures are sometimes harder to obtain than the quantitative measures, but we think they're no less important. And we'll talk about that more next time. And we want to be really clear, even though we're going to talk about this next time, we are in no way downplaying the momentum metrics and key performance indicators identified by CCRC and the AACC Pathways Project. They are critically important, as we told you, highly predictive. They would be complemented by the types of student experience related questions that we're talking about. And by the way, CCRC was part of the group. We crowdsourced these questions to it. And for the guide we're going to talk about today, we're not providing answers to these decisions. There's not one right way to go about any of these single topics. What we can share, and I think in the breakout rooms we're going to especially do this, is let you share, all right, what are some of those key decisions by stage? And what are some things you've done at your college? And your kind of presenters and others can share. Here's some things we've seen around the country. The approaches have to fit the college culture and evolve over time as you evaluate effectiveness. I like to think of this work as design work that we're doing. We're designing the student experience. And although I actually finally had someone recently tell me that architects also do this, I like to think of this not like architects who have to design the perfect building. They plan and have different iterations of their plan, but when you're an architect and the building goes live, it's got to be perfect structurally, right, to withstand tornadoes and hurricanes and snowstorms and ice storms and wind, right? That's not the way we're thinking about designing the student experience. I like to think about it more like an iPhone, right? I got an iPhone 11 right here, right? When I had an iPhone 1, there's things I can do with an iPhone 11 I couldn't have imagined back in the iPhone 1, right? They were probably a gleam in some Apple developer's eye, but as a user, like to be able to have it integrate with like every car rental in the country, like Waze just automatically comes up, and Apple CarPlay, like all that stuff, that is a dream in anyone's eye back in version 1. And the point and the reason why Apple and companies like Apple are so strong is they think about the experience and they make it better over time. That's how we're like trying to think about this stuff. One last thing before we dive in. We've used the lost momentum framework as a way to organize these kind of decisions, and that's because as we reflected on this over time, the lost momentum framework is a way to kind of think of the student experience. It talks about stages of the student experience. In the original version, it had connection, entry, progress, and completion, so that when we started completion by design, those were the kind of the 4 key stages of the framework. And the point was that there were loss points and momentum points that existed at each of those 4 stages in the student experience. As we moved from completion by design into AACC pathways, and Michigan and Arkansas were actually involved in some of our CCRCs and our reflection on this, we looked at, people started asking the question, okay, so that's great that there are loss and momentum points in the student experience, but what do we do about it? Like, what do we at the college do about those lost momentum points in the student experience? And that's where the 4 pillars came from. Right? It's a way to organize how colleges respond to the experience. So these decisions we're talking about, you can actually organize them either way, by the 4 pillars or by the lost momentum framework. Our friend Ed Bowling likes to say that the lost momentum framework is better for describing the student experience because it's based in it. The pillars describe our response to it. So partially to make the point that we may have lost the thread of the student experience being at the heart of the work, and partially because it just fit better. We've been using the lost momentum framework for this. You want to say anything about this from a pillar standpoint?
No, I think that, you know, that Ed and Jenny and Erica and Hannah, of course, we did this work with completion by design, and we talked about the lost momentum framework, which evolved even through completion by design. When we got to the AACC work and we started to figure out how we can help colleges actually think about how to structurally organize to do the work, that it became more about the back office stuff, like what do you take on first, what do you take on second, what do you leverage that you've done already, how do you organize all the pieces and parts around institutional change. We moved away from the lost momentum framework because the lost momentum framework was the front-facing part of the work and the student experience. Now we are going back to talk to colleges about, okay, so you did all of this work, so what? It's the what and the so what of it all. So there is, as we talk to folks that are even beginning the work, but are even, and folks that are further along, taking a step back and looking at how the student experience has changed. You know, guided pathways, I just said this to a funder the other day, guided pathways is just an organizational construct for institutional transformation, right? The heart of the work is that you are changing, you're fundamentally changing the structures of your institution so that the student experience looks very different than it looked a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago. And it is about having students have an intake process that connects them to programs and careers, a structure built around them so that creates a sense of belonging and that they have a person or a group of people that they can contact at the within your organizational structure that is their person, so that it increases the sense of belonging. And then early on connection to what it means to be part of a program and what that means, whether it's a transfer to a four-year institution or direct employment. When St. Petersburg and Sinclair went from overnight, from when the COVID crisis started, to the online delivery, Sinclair in the first week made 40,000 calls to their students. And overnight, they had a script that they sent to all their frontline advisors and anyone that worked in student services about contacting students, about keeping them enrolled, what did they need, how did they need to get it, and who needed to make the follow-up calls afterwards. In 1 week, they made 40,000 calls. St. Petersburg, they did it through their career and academic communities. And their frontline folks reached out in the beginning and did the recapture to keep people enrolled. And what do you need? Do you need a computer? Do you need a hotspot? Are you food insecure? Are you housing insecure? How can we help you? In 3 weeks in, the faculty in that career academic community and their meta majors started reaching out to students who hadn't accessed Canvas, who had withdrawn, who had started to drop off in their assignments. The faculty members started calling those students saying, what do you need? How can we help you? If you withdrew, how do we get you back in? So they had, having those structures in place that existed already that were more holistic around student supports, they were able to activate then a structure almost on a dime to keep students enrolled. Sinclair only lost 7% of their students in the COVID crisis, and St. Petersburg lost less than 10%. In St. Petersburg, summer and fall enrollment were flat within 1 month after they went online. So students felt like they were being cared for within their organization, and they also were able to respond to student needs much more quickly if those infrastructures were not in place.
Awesome, thank you. Wondering what our bulldog, by the way, getting a bulldog puppy 2 weeks before a pandemic sounds good, but then when you're working at home constantly, like if it's a bulldog puppy, there are some great things about it, but there are also some other things about it. Excuse me. So I think this is a great time to pause for a second, get a chance for everyone to catch their breath. Any questions coming in? I can't, again, see chat, so Jenny or Erica, if there are questions that people have about how did we get to here, then we will kind of go through some of these key decisions. We're going to run through them fairly fast. I said there's a lot of them. We'll do a little bit of editorial commenting in the middle. But we will also have time in the breakouts to go further into them. So if there are any questions, Jenny or Erica, we can stop for a moment, give people a second to ask them, and then we'll kind of dive in. As that's happening, I'll tell you, I told half of the story about the loss momentum framework. The other half is that CCRC, who's been kind of thinking about this a lot, we had 4 stages originally: connection, entry, progress, and completion. In the revised version, we combine progress and completion. So it's connection, entry, progress, completion, and then advancement, which was really what was that?
This makes much sense.
Yeah, which makes more sense Davis always talked about designing with the end in mind and working backwards from it. The advancement stage helps you focus on, for example, what happens after student. We all think of transfer as a great outcome. Well, transfer with junior standing with successful graduation of a bachelor's degree in a field with a living wage is a good outcome, right? Or going directly into the workforce to get that living wage opportunity is a great outcome as well. So the advancement stage asks some questions about that as well. So I think that was a great update from our friends at CCRC. And so if there aren't any more, and I'm not seeing any right yet, Jenny, you can always interrupt. We'll just kind of fire ahead here. So here are some of the key guided pathways decisions we identified. And by the way, we crowdsourced this. This is not an NCII list, it's an NCII and Friends list. We sent this idea out to Kay McClenny and Gretchen Schmidt at AACC at the time, at Hannah and John Fink and Davis Jenkins at CCRC, Evelyn Waiwale and Linda Garcia at SESI, Ed Boland in North Carolina, Chris Baldwin in Michigan, our kind of guided pathways coaching friends, as well as Josh Weiner and Keith Wisdom at ASSEM. So this represents kind of the cumulative nature of that feedback in these questions. And there's about 7 or 8 per section. So now we're at the connection stage as students are getting connection to college. And the first one is, how do we deepen the college's relationship with our K-12 partners to ensure early exploration of careers in college programs? And so, I mean, there's been some really good work. You look at places that have strong dual enrollment programs. We could do a whole another 90-minute session on dual enrollment. A lot of the work CCRC has done is really important. One thing Davis was saying for a long time before people were listening, he does that a lot. He says stuff for a long time before people listen. It's just kind of the way, how you deal with Davis. But he was saying early on in this process that there's dual enrollment and then there's dual enrollment with a purpose. And if we're all kind of self-reflective about this, those of us who have dual enrollment would share that it wasn't always done with a clear end in mind, right? We had, dual enrollment at some colleges in this country has approached 50% of the actual enrollment at the college, which is a huge risk, by the way, because with one pen stroke, that can all be gone. Dual enrollment done well can be an amazing bridge to higher education for populations of students who didn't have it before. 2 big problems with dual enrollment. One is that if you don't make those intentional bridges to especially colleges, parts of your community, low-income parts of your community or communities of color, that dual enrollment can become yet again another entitlement for the upper middle class to get and upper class to get college credit when it's not reaching the very people we were designing it for bridges to higher education. That just kind of happens by osmosis. It usually isn't intentional, but when you step back sometimes and look at the data of which high schools are really using dual credits well, sometimes you'll find at colleges that it's not the high school districts or the systems you are most hoping to get. The other challenge with dual enrollment, and this is why these K-12 questions on this first page here about the guided pathways related changes, is that one of the big problems that we're addressing in guided pathways, which called the cafeteria model, just taking a bunch of courses and hoping they add up to something or figuring it out later. Well, in a lot of places, I don't know about you, I used to be a VP of instruction in California, and in our dual credit program, this was the scenario by which we often picked courses, which is the high school geography teacher retires, and the high school doesn't want to hire another geography teacher, so they asked us, you guys have a geography department, can you teach our high school geography program as a dual credit course? We say, sure, everyone wins. The students have a geography course, the high school doesn't have to rehire. We have an assignment for our geography instructor. The question of why a student in high school is taking that geography course is an interesting question, and to what end, right? So I think this is where Davis and CCRC talk about dual credit with a purpose. How does dual credit lead to momentum in programs? Because if you think about it, we already have challenges within our community college system about students taking a bunch of courses, feeling lost, not knowing where it's going. And if we just push that same system down into the high school with even less guidance, like guidance counselors who have less insight into what transfers or what doesn't transfer, what's the nuance between going to Michigan State or Western Michigan in that psych course you're taking, right? All of those things that matter. And I know Michigan's working on some transfer stuff that's really impressive, but how does that feed back into the high schools and the courses we choose for dual credit? So I think both of these questions are around those relationships to high school. Any colleges you can think of in the ACC that have done particularly good jobs? El Paso.
Indian River.
Indian River, can I say more? Yeah.
Yeah, so Indian River has, and Hannah could weigh in because CCRC has done a bunch of work and John Fink and Davis just did a site visit there. But Indian River is pushing their pathways down into the high school so that students can start their program paths in the high school and then transition into Indian River, and whether they stay in Indian River, who has a small number of bachelor's degrees, or transfer to a Florida institution. Marcia Ballinger is doing some great work at Lorraine with Ohio's what they call College Credit Plus in Ohio. They have both an early college high school where students can complete a Lorraine degree at the same time they complete their high school degree, but it is all embedded with career experiences and applied learning experiences and their programs of study, so that it is not just a bunch of gen ed courses. It is very deliberate and it is very architected for students. And Marcia has also done the work where their College Credit Plus programs can lead into a degree program at Lorraine, and then they have 3+1 transfer agreements with a university partnership that lives on the Lorraine campus, that the students can complete the bachelor's degree with a 3+1. And Marcia has a return on investment structure that talks about how much money a student would pay direct entry into a program of study in one of their university partners, Bowling Green or one of the other university partners, and what it would cost if a student started in College Credit Plus, finished the 3 years in Lorraine, and then did the final year at the university partner. And it is about 17% of the total cost. And so, but in order to have that 17% of the total cost, the student can't wander around dual credit and the student can't wander around Lorraine. They have to be on a program path through the institutions in a seamless way. And they have handoffs built in so that students understand where the transitions are and what they mean and how to navigate those transitions. And so it is done in a very deliberate, structured way with milestones and supports built around it.
Yeah, and Alamo down in Texas has done really good work in the San Antonio area on kind of the mapping of the meta majors that they selected to the high school endorsements. There's a House bill in Texas which required high school, I think it's freshman.
It's HB 5, and
yeah.
So it aligned what is in high school endorsements with into the college programs. And so most colleges in Texas mapped their meta majors back to the high school endorsement areas. Alamo is really a great example of this. If you go on Alamo's website, their meta majors are called institutes, and you will see that they have a whole structure around their institutes that also back maps them into the HB 5 endorsements of their feeder high schools. And so they have also developed those really clear, deliberate paths from the high school into the community college, and then into Alamo has 8 transfer partners.
Yeah, I was going to say,
they have to map into their 8 transfer partners.
Coming later, they're a great example on a future decision about how do you do the math on that. I think they've mapped 100 different GE programs to each of 7 or 8 transfer processes. I think they have over 1,000 transfer maps now is the number I heard. And it's like 4 publics and 3 privates. They've done some really amazing, now again, that's over time. This is not something that happened overnight. Alamo was in year 1 of completion by design. They've been in 2 or 3 Texas Completes things. They've had ATD and Kay McClenny as their coach. They've also were part of AACC Pathways 1.0. So again, over time, they've done some amazing work. Some other questions here on the kind of connection phase. Again, we'll have much more time to explore these in the breakouts, and you get a chance to go to 2 of them. So how does the application process change when we roll out Pathways? Like at the simplest level, What about meta majors? Are you including a question about meta majors on your application, or is that going to come later in the onboarding process? Colleges have done both, right? There are some colleges who have the meta major on the application who then later verify it through other steps in the process, because much like the students who are eligible, who have to choose a program at the start, the thought being, well, they also need to choose a meta major, and sometimes the meta major is the program, which is a whole other conversation. But the questions around the application, I think, who is it? Actually, is it Jackson maybe who's done the work of the multiple questions, like, do you know what program you want to go to? I can't think Jackson, or maybe it's Lorraine. There's a couple colleges who've done some really interesting things on the application where they ask, what is your goal here at the college? Is your goal to transfer and get a degree? Is your goal to get a degree? And it's interesting because they use some like almost reverse psychology on folks to get more people to understand that they're actually on a degree path and a transfer path. But the question of the application process changed. And then the second, the analog to this is that what do you do after you get the application? And that is kind of under a guided pathways approach. How do you respond intentionally? An example out of Arizona, our friends in Maricopa, Estrella Mountain, they made some investments a la Jackson and some extra student services personnel along with their guided pathways work. And what Estrella did, which is a suburb west, which used to be really far west of Phoenix, which is now like that area has grown like kind of more in the center. Estrella serves a slightly lower income population. I mean, all of Maricopa is very diverse, but Estrella's a lower income population. They are having what they call student success navigators, a term you hear from Jackson too, who take the student from the day after application through the first week of classes, and they manage their process at every step of the way. And that's something they've built. Like, and by the way, they're rolling it out this fall, and they're having to decide what's going to be different because of COVID-19. But they've really thought deeply, and I met with these folks right before the pandemic happened, and the ownership they felt over managing the student journey along this process, that they've looked at their data. It's one of the questions that'll come when we see you next time. That what percentage of students actually filled out your application but never enrolled? And at some colleges, that number approaches 50%, right? So this is a big deal at this stage when you talk about how do we respond and what needs. And Gretchen's big on business process reengineering. Like, this isn't like, none of this stuff happens by osmosis. If you want there to be a different experience for your students, you have to design it.
And I also think that as you socialize meta majors in your high schools with high school, whatever you call them, with high school counselors and with parents, and it becomes your front-facing entry point into your institution, the chance of a student over time understanding what picking a meta major is, at least at a surface level in an application process, grows, right? This is, when Rob talks about version 1.0 and version 2.0, in the end, guided pathways builds a continuous improvement structure within your organization. So you don't stop looking at your processes and changing them, that you examine what the gaps are in your system, what comes next, how you prioritize it, and what is that going to mean to the student experience in practice. So, Ed Massey and Indian River is really the best example of a transformation of an organization where they don't sit on their laurels. They don't stop changing. They don't turn a switch on and just say, now we did that and it's done. It is, now we did that. What is the impact? Who did it impact? Who did it impact disproportionately? How do we make a change to make it better? And when do we implement that change, and how? It is built into the culture there. It is in the water, but they just do not sit on their laurels after they've done something successfully. It is what was successful about it, what was not successful about it, how are we going to fix it, and when do we roll out the next version? And so this version 1.0, 2.0, when you're on version 6.0, it is just built into your culture that you never go back to version 1.0, right? What version 1.0 is history. This is, we are building a culture where we only get better at what we do. And that's done through examination of data, focus groups of students, an internal structure that is always asking, what do we have to fix? Who is this working for? Who is this not working for? And what comes next?
Awesome. We're really glad you're spending the next 4 hours with us. We can go through each of these at this. Oh wait, we only have 20 more minutes. Okay, so we're going to move through these a little more quickly, and we're going to again have time in the breakouts to explore them more deeply. We want to make sure you see all of them. So I'll go through the rest of Connection. We'll maybe make 1 or 2 editorials in each of the 3 remaining ones. But recruiting, how does recruiting change? When we're recruiting into meta majors, how do we change that relationship to the high school? So you're not just saying, come to the college, right? We're saying, well, one of your first choices is going to be, what a great opportunity to take this like really hard student experience task of choosing from 200 programs and saying, hey, don't worry about that yet. We've got these 7 or 8 areas that you can choose from what you're more interested in. By the way, if you need to change, it's fine. If you're more interested in, how do we help students make that informed choice? How do we use the high schools to help make that bridge into meta majors and programs of study stronger? And then also, how do we start working on equity at the recruiting stage so that one of the data tests you can run sometimes is look at the demographics of your highest income programs, your programs that lead to highest wages and the programs that lead to the lowest wages. You will very likely find a strong demographic difference. What do we do about that? Well, it starts up front here with recruiting. Other things at Connection, how do we build that sense of connection? It's the title of the stage. Like, where do we bring this sense of connection and belonging? Much of the research coming out of folks like Laura Rendon and Ceci suggests that the sense of connection and belonging and validation are the strongest things that can help communities of color and students of color feel more connected to institutions. Not from a deficit model, but from building that sense of connection and belonging to address kind of some systemic issues. How do we ensure students have the information they need to make that decision on meta majors? And again, because meta majors it's not a life sentence. If you choose business, it's not like you can't get out of it. The whole reason we're doing this is to help you explore something in a focused way, get a sense of community. And by the way, if you decide you hate business after semester 1, perfect. That's much better than deciding it after semester 8, right? You decide after semester 1, everything you took is going to be gen ed, that you're going to still be able to make progress on whatever you move to. So how do we explain that to students, that this isn't like kind of the one thing you're choosing for the rest of your life? Those are all kind of at the connection stage. And then how do we translate this decision that the student makes about initial meta majors into a first semester or first year schedule? Quick story from California, unlikely source for this story, given some of the challenges for doing things systemically in the California system with the overregulation. Ed Bush at Cosumnes River College is a very strong president of Cosumnes River College, African-American gentleman who says that all the students who come to my college when they make an initial choice about meta major are going to get a year-long full-time schedule as their default schedule. End of story. Now, that's a college, by the way, that is only 35% full-time. He's got 2/3 of his students who aren't full-time either. But what he says about this very passionately is, I want to stop assuming what our students can't do and start assuming what they can do with the right support. And he knows, by the way, that students may opt out of that and only have a part-time schedule, but the insidious piece of that, or the well-designed piece, is they got to come talk to someone to opt out of it, right? And in talking to someone, they may be able to get some resources that help them go more full-time, or at least know that very strongly that the courses they're taking are on path. That's obviously an extreme version of this. I think it hasn't started yet. They're again, not sure what's happening with the pandemic and whether they're actually going to do that this fall, but really strong work about how do we create this sense of community and also scheduling to support the selection of meta majors. And then there's the issue of basic needs. Again, My Best and Precious and the team in Michigan doing great work helping colleges think about basic needs and things like housing and nutrition and transportation, childcare and healthcare. How do we access those related supports? Okay, the entry stage. So the kind of now students are at the college, and here's where we spent a lot of time talking earlier. How do we take that initial decision about a meta major and turn it into meaningful participation at a community major? So 2 goals of meta majors: trying to inform students, and as Gretchen said, a choice architecture to make a more informed choice about programs, but also to build engagement in community. When you talk about the equity work of undoing systemic racism and systemic problems for students who come from poverty, part of the issue is going to be this community and getting first time in college students relationship capital and social capital in communities. This is one from our friends at CCRC. How do we ensure that students take a well-taught college level course relevant to their interests in the first term? that the students made a choice, right? They chose business, or they chose natural science, or they chose humanities. Let's make sure they have at least one course in there that's really relevant to their interests, that's really well taught. We spend a lot of time talking about pedagogy around math and English courses, but in the end of the day, 3 to 4% of your students are going to be math or English majors, if it's even that high. 96 to 98% of them are going to major in something else. So let's make sure that they have that experience in something that's really relevant to them, and focus on kind of teaching and learning in those initial courses. We should focus on it across the curriculum, but really think about what are the right courses for students to take in that first semester, in that first term, to give them a positive experience and get them excited. And even, by the way, to see the context for math and English, right? All of those things relevant here. How do we help students make an informed student about program study by the end of the first term? How can we assist them exploring interesting careers? I will tell you that this little bullet here, in my opinion, is the most undersold piece of Pathways. Is how to help students intentionally and systemically explore their interest, match them to careers and programs. It is a very hard challenge. Our friends at Lake Michigan, we've been working with in the cohort model and A2I2, has come up with a really intriguing way to test, which is to do it as a non-credit course, a required non-credit course that's going to help students explore interesting careers. Some colleges go all the way to a 3-unit course. You'll see a bunch of questions on this in a second. But how do we accelerate attempting and completing college level math and English in the first year? You heard Jenny talk about that statewide effort. Lots going on nationally there. How do we ensure students are taking the right math course for their meta major program? I mean, a lot of dev ed reform, especially in math, although it's true in English, focused on the curricular changes around that we needed to make, either co-rec or acceleration, as if that was independent of a guided pathways concept. But alternate math pathways is absolutely it's a guided pathways concept, because you need to know what meta major someone, if you're going to ask me as a psychologist with a doctorate in psychology, what's the right math course for a psych major? I need to know, like, by the way, my default answer to that would be statistics. It's most likely going to be statistics. But there are subfields of psychology, cognitive psych and neuropsych, which are highly math-based, where it's going to be the algebra to calculus sequence, right? So the programs that the students take help dictate the math. Now, if I only could give one answer without asking the students more questions, and I was the person in charge of what's the right math for psychology, I would absolutely stay statistics, because it covers 80 to 90% of students taking the second most popular major in the country, and it gets them out of the sequence that the students have the most challenge completing, right? So this issue of, is this really dev ed reform or guided pathways reform? It's both. I mean, to me, it's more about how to get students to pass the right transfer level math and English courses. Friends down at Lorraine in Ohio, I don't know how far they went with this, we're testing the idea of even contextualizing the English course. So if English 101 or English 1A has the same course outline, but why not teach it like in a business version, in a natural science version, in a humanities version, where the readings and the prompts are kind of tailored to what students are doing? Like, opens up some amazing opportunities. Some challenges to scale that, of course, right? We wouldn't, but some colleges are going down that front as well. All right, so here, this is going to sound like, I mentioned that we think this question is really important. It's so important, we have like 14 sub-questions on this, which is, will you use a first-term course to assist students in making an informed decision about a program of study? So a lot of college had student success courses. A lot of college has had these courses. As we move into the pathways world, I think one of the things we realized in the research is the more, if not exclusively, but the more intentionally the course focuses on career exploration and matching interest and learning about careers and how program choices affect your career options, being a huge benefit of these courses. I'm not saying that some of the student success things we did weren't important or aren't still important. And it may be that if you do a 3-unit course, you can cover both. But we would strongly urge you to not lose the thread of how will students get this career exploration. Meaning, we all know how we did it historically, is we had someone in career services, if a student dropped in and asked, they could find out more. They could also ask faculty members about careers. And we also had a link to Career Coach or EMSI on the website. Those 3 options didn't reach many students, and it certainly didn't reach the students who needed it the most, and it wasn't very intentional. We're not saying you have to have a first-term course, although I will say I can't think of a better way to more intentionally build in this notion of exploring careers and matching interest in programs. You see some sub-questions here. Will the course be required? Will it be 1, 2, or 3 units? Can it be offered 4 or 8 weeks? Credit or non-credit? Who will teach it? What will the minimum quals be? That's a big issue, for example, in Texas, at some of the colleges where they've had a course like this. I think of El Paso, who's had this course on the books as a mandatory course since 2002. But over time, through accretion and deletion and osmosis, that course has become to be many different things to many different people. And the great folks at El Paso are realizing we need to be more clear about what this course is, what it's trying to do, and how do we train the people who are teaching it, because they have hundreds of sections of it now, right? So the idea of what those courses focusing on. Are we going to offer field-specific versions of the course, meeting by meta major? Still more. What's the breakdown between career and academic exploration and planning versus overall college skills? How will it help all students get an academic plan? Will you do that in the course, or is that done outside the course with support? How do we support teaching the course with PD? So you can see there's a lot under this we think is a really important question. If you answer no to we're not going to have this type of first term course, it does beg the question where this really important piece of pathways is going to live, right? It's not impossible to do it other places, but I do think it's something that intentionality and authenticity to this issue is a big deal. How do we translate that first? We talked about it earlier. How do we make sure that students are getting that full program customized ed plan? By the way, the course idea, and many of the courses we've seen developed, it is one of the outcomes of the course is that every student has made a choice about program and has a full program customized ed plan to go into semesters 2 and beyond. If you're not going to do that, how do you get students that full program customized ed plan? California for years has had a statewide regulation that every student needs an ed plan, but it's generally been interpreted as a first semester ed plan, which is great. That's a good first step. But if you don't have a process on the back end to convert that first semester plan into a full program, that's when students start getting lost. They're not lost yet at the first semester. They start getting lost at the end of first semester, right? So do you have mandatory advising that's going to come later as well? Or do you have other ways to help students get to that full program ed plan? Who's exempted from identifying a meta major? If I come in and say, I'm in the welding program, I want to join the welding program. Maybe the meta major isn't something I need because I'm going directly into the welding program. Starts getting more fuzzy when you say, I want to get into the nursing program. Well, there's an interesting question because you're not in the nursing program when you want to get into the nursing program. You're one of the hundreds, if not thousands of people on a community college campus who are pre-nursing. You might argue that pre-nursing students are the ones who need a meta major kind of experience the most to learn about things that they can do for the 90% of them who aren't getting into nursing programs, right? Big guided pathways idea. So those are quickly the entry stage. Any quick thoughts on those? You want to just let it go to the Yeah. So at the progress and completion stage, so now we're starting as students are moved in. Who's advising students? A lot of these questions are around advising. Once they've decided the plan, Gretchen's going to explore this in her breakout. What is that progress and completion advising going to cover? There's a transition in advising from the things you do up front to the things you do in ongoing ways. What do you do with students who are undecided after the first term, right? Sometimes colleges have decided that's where we need holds on registrations for those who don't have a recorded plan or haven't made a choice. Others have other ways of dealing with this. Will they be required to meet with an advisor at various checkpoints? Once a semester, once a year. There are colleges, I'd say 1 in 5 maybe, where students are required to meet with an advisor every semester, some sort of advisor. Others, it's not required at all, right? There's far more in the latter category than the former. But will the students be required to meet with advisors? How will the college check to see if students have fallen off their path? Are advisors managing that? Is it technology plus advisors? Is it both? We would argue it shouldn't be technology alone. But if a student has fallen off their path, who's going to intervene, right? The early story from Sinclair on that was when they put in the, what was that program called?
MAPP.
Their MAPP, which monitored student progress on plan. And this is what happens when you put in a new technology. They were early in this. We're talking like 2012, 2013 in completion by design. Before all the vendors figured out this was something we needed. Like this is before, who am I thinking of? All the vendors who were doing ed planning. EAB and all these other Navigate. Before that was MAP from Sinclair, and they would create like a red light if a student had fallen off path. Well, and when they started doing this, what was it, 90% of their students had a red light? Okay, now they have a red light, now what, right? What's the process for how we intervene? Over time, Sinclair's become wizard-like at how they do this. This goes all the way back to the work of Arizona State in the early days of guided pathways when they did this kind of who had fallen off path. And in the early days, it was 80, 90% of their students were off path. Well, now, 10 years later, in any given year, students who are 2 years in, only 20 or 15% of them are off path rather than 90 because they're managing it. How do we get people back on path? how do we embed discipline, appropriate academic supports into student pathways? So the things, for example, that athletes get, required study halls, tutoring, all those things that check-ins on progress, that maybe we don't do it exactly the same way we do it for athletes, but athletes have really high success levels at transfer rates in most community colleges, partially because they're not asking for support. It's kind of required and embedded into the journey. How do we focus on student-centered, equity-minded, culturally responsive teaching and learning under a guided pathways framework? Really good work starting on this front. It's kind of the fourth pillar of pathways that we're learning, still evolving the most on. AAC and you and SESI are doing some work on this. Other organizations as well doing great work on the teaching and learning front. How do we ensure active and experiential learning are embedded into the pathways experience? Are other big ideas. How often do program and meta major faculty come together to devote to student learning assessment? So if this is really about programs, this is kind of the old SLO world placed in the pathways world with a context that maybe makes it more authentic than how a lot of us did student learning outcome assessment. And I throw myself into the old category of, largely because of accreditors, we're forced into these checkbox compliance modes of assessing student learning outcomes. How do we build authenticity in there using the pathways framework to find a melding and merging of these big ideas? How often do we check in with students about their career or transfer goals? I love the early data. This was also Lorraine, whose researcher found that she went and looked at last year's graduates and then looked into the database and saw what their major was in the database versus what they actually got a degree in, and found that it was different 60% of the time. That's 60, not 16. 60% of the students who graduated, if you looked in the system, would have had a different major in the system. Well, that was, again, a long time ago and early on. But the point is, how would you ever get that goal updated, right? I mean, how do we know what students' paths are? Theoretically, getting them on plans and monitoring it will help with this. How do we connect students with industry and workforce opportunities through job shadowing, internships, co-op experience, service learning, mentoring? By the way, what are called high impact practices by AAC and you, and vast amounts of research suggesting, hey, guess who gets high impact practices? The upper middle class and majority students. Guess who doesn't get it? Lower income students and students of color. Right, so on average, that is true. So how do we make sure that we're having these high impact practices for all of our students? A couple more here about how do we work on financial stability needs. Again, the My Best support that's coming from Precious and the team and Priya from our team to help colleges focus on financial stability. And finally, the last couple of decisions under the advancement phase, which I think Katie and Erica are going to share later. How do we support students applying to transfer programs and jobs? Not just at the end, but early on in the process. How do we build in that kind of notion of the transfer process early on? How do we measure equity and what happens post-graduation? We talked about this earlier. I think this question is a reason to have this stage here, is that we need to pay more attention to what happens after our students leave us. Not just bachelor's degree attainment, but how long it takes to get there and how many units are being repeated after transfer. Other advancement questions: how do we build stronger bridges to our transfer partners for a transition, including for supports? This is something that Priya talks about a lot, is we work on financial stability at the community college. There's a transition for students between getting support from us to getting support at the four-year transfer institution. How do we build those bridges with our primary transfer partners? If someone transfers from Grand Rapids to Middle Tennessee State, that's going to be a hard transition to build bridges for. But from Grand Rapids to Central Michigan, or Western Michigan, or whoever the primary transfer partner is, you can build those bridges that will cover a majority of your students. Stronger relationship with employers, so this is a more authentic feedback loop. And just to finish, I ran across one of these posts of what's the student experience really for students. I love this one. Students ask how college is going so far, and you post the answer to that, which is math, an online math. I'm thinking Alex or something, where the correct answer is the cube root of 5y squared plus x squared, and the student's answer was 3. That's how the student experience feels sometimes, with what we think the answer is and what they're actually experiencing. So again, we know that was really fast, right? And there's a lot of decisions in there. We know that and this is why we built some time into the breakouts to explore them further. We want to mainly hear from you about the things you've been working on. So we're gonna, just to lead into the breakouts, and we'll take the break now, and your breakout facilitators will be kind of asking you these questions you can think about over the break. On which of these key decisions has your college engaged in significant work? What have you learned? What have been the challenges, the things that have gone well that you can share with your peers? And some of the second question would be around, which of these do you really feel, all right, by the way, you should not take all 32 of these, run back and go, all right, we need to work on these. what we're thinking is the optimal way to kind of introduce these back at a college is to say, we've got this list that are reframing things back on the student experience. What are 3 or 4 of these we might need to work on now that are the next level for us, or even a deeper level of things we've started? What would some of those be, and how and why are some of those relevant to you? And with that, and we know this is kind of a fire hose on the actual decisions, but it's meant to be something you reflect on and take back with you. And any final words from you before we hand it to the breakout? Jenny, we'll hand it back to you. There, obviously, the PowerPoint will be available to you. I think it's already up. But these are, we're going to move into the breakouts and have discussions by stage. So there's going to be, and I think Jenny's probably about to tell you about all of this right now. So thank you so much. If you have specific questions after today, Gretchen or I are both available. Rob at ncii-improve.com, Gretchen at ncii-improve.com as well. So thank you.
Thanks so much. That was fantastic. I really appreciate the information, and it is like drinking from a fire hose, but we do have the information available to you. We have the slides available, and we are going to talk about it in the breakouts. So I have some work for you to do before you can have a break, and I know you're probably all eager to get more coffee or other biological needs taken care of. What I'm going to need you to do, here are the choices of breakout topics. If you are a Mentor Circle lead from Bay, KBCC, Kellogg, Lake Michigan, Montcalm, or West Shore, you must choose breakout session 1. Everyone else can choose to talk about connection, entry, progress completion, or advancement, and then we will rotate these same topics in the second set of breakouts. So here's what you need to do. Remember, I told you how important renaming is in this game. Whoops, I'm not in my slideshow view, am I? Hang on. Okay. So renaming is very important. So now what you're going to need to do is to go back to your list of participants and rename yourself to add the number of the first breakout that you will join. So go back, take that step, the participant list.
We're going to stay here and do this.
And then add, and if you are a breakout leader, actually you have to add the number, you have to rename yourself and add the number also. So I can make sure to put you in the breakout room. So while you're all happily doing your break activities, I will be frantically assigning people to breakout rooms. So if you don't do this renaming task, you will not get assigned to a breakout room. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. And you'll get, make a choice to do it. I'll put choose your breakout session. And then also in the chat, just for fun, share a song, a title, and an artist that is keeping you on your pathway lately. And check out our tweets at MCCA CSS. Katie has been tweeting, and there's been some activity there, so you might want to check and see. We've captured some gold nuggets from this conversation, and we'll continue to do so. So we're going to take a 15-minute break, so we're going to be a little bit behind. We will return at 10:50. But remember that I cannot assign you cannot be assigned to a breakout room if you do not select the number. I think that Katie has put or someone has put in the chat the numbers for the breakout rooms if you don't see them. So.
Jenny, somebody in the chat asked if you could please go back to that slide that shows the breakout sessions.
I could.
Thanks, and then I can copy that and put it in the chat.
Okay, great. There you go. Okay, so if you all want to go ahead and do that and then come back together at 10:50, I will see you then.